The fence was only the first thing Ethan Mercer noticed was broken. By sunset, he would discover that the tired woman standing behind it was holding an entire ranch together with bleeding hands, unpaid bills, and a secret she had told no one. Before winter arrived, Ethan would have to decide whether to repair her land and ride away, or remain long enough to fix the part of himself he had spent 2 years trying to forget. It was October of 1886 when Ethan rode into Willow Creek County, Colorado, beneath a sky the color of cold iron. He carried a carpenter's bag, $12 in his coat, and a gilt so heavy that even his horse seemed tired of carrying it. For nearly 2 years, Ethan had moved from town to town repairing barns, sheds, gates, and cattle pens. He never stayed after a job was finished. He never gave anyone time to ask where he came from. Most importantly, he never accepted work that required him to build anything important. Small repairs were safer. A loose board could be replaced. A broken gate could be rehung. A damaged roof could be patched before the next rain. Such work did not ask him to trust his judgment. It did not remind him of the day his judgment had failed and changed another man's life forever. Ethan had learned that a man could escape questions if he kept moving. He found the ranch several miles outside the small town of Cedar Hollow. A weathered sign beside the road read Bennett Ranch, though half the letters had faded under years of wind and sun. The boundary fence ran beside the road for almost half a mile. Several posts leaned toward the ground. Rails had cracked. Rusted wire hung loose between the remaining sections. One strong storm would tear the whole line apart. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop and studied it. This was not the kind of damage caused by laziness. He had seen neglected ranches before. This was different. Someone had been repairing one section at a time while the rest continued to fail. "Your fence is falling apart," Ethan said quietly. "So am I." The woman's voice came from behind him. Ethan turned in the saddle. She stood near a crooked gate with a wooden bucket in one hand and a hammer in the other. She looked no older than 28, but exhaustion had placed shadows beneath her brown eyes. Her dark hair was tied at the back of her neck, though several loose strands moved across her face in the wind. Her faded blue dress was covered by a worn gray coat that was too thin for the coming cold. She looked at the fence, then back at Ethan. "Fix whichever one you can," she said. There was no smile in her words, but there was no anger either. She sounded like a woman who no longer had the strength to hide the truth. Ethan climbed down from his horse. "How much fence needs work?" "All of it." "How much can you pay?" "Not enough." He looked along the damaged boundary again. The woman rested the bucket beside the gate. "My name is Clara Bennett. This ranch belonged to my husband. He died in April. Now it belongs to me, the bank, and every person who thinks a widow cannot survive winter alone." Ethan noticed the cracks across her knuckles. One finger was wrapped in a strip of cloth stained with dried blood. "You have cattle?" 36 head. "Hay?" "Enough for half the winter, unless I can cut and store what remains in the north field." "Anyone helping you?" "You are the first man who has stopped without trying to buy the land." Ethan looked at her carefully. She held his gaze without fear, but he could see how tired she was. "What happened to your husband?" "A horse kicked him while he was repairing the lower barn. He lived for 4 days." Her voice remained steady, though her grip tightened around the hammer. Ethan knew the sound of grief that had been repeated, so often it no longer came with tears. "I can repair the fence," he said. Clara glanced at his tools. "You know what you're doing." "Most days." That is not a comforting answer. It is an honest one. For the first time, something softened in her face. "I can pay $10 for 6 weeks, she said. "You can sleep in the barn loft. Meals are included when there is enough food to call them meals." Ethan had earned more for 2 days of work in larger towns. Still, he found himself looking beyond the gate toward the lonely farmhouse, the damaged barn, and the fields stretching beneath the gray sky. "When do I start?" Clara picked up the bucket. "You already did when you stopped." That evening, Ethan sat across from her at a small kitchen table scarred by years of use. A single oil lamp filled the room with weak yellow light. Supper was bean stew, hard bread, and coffee strong enough to hide how old it was. There were 2 empty chairs at the table. Clara noticed him looking at them. "One belonged to my husband," she said. "The other was for the child we planned to have." Ethan lowered his eyes to his bowl. She opened a thin ledger and turned it toward him. Every page was filled with careful numbers. "My husband Thomas borrowed money for seed and a new plow last spring. The note is due in 7 weeks, $80. How much do you have?" 23. "The cattle. If I sell before winter, the buyers will offer half their value because they know I am desperate. The wheat. Still in the west field. I need to bring it in and get it to the mill before the road freezes." Ethan studied the figures. The numbers were plain. Clara needed the fence repaired, the wheat harvested, the barn strengthened, and the remaining hay cut before the first heavy snow. 6 weeks would barely be enough with 3 men. There were only 2 of them. "You know this may not work," Ethan said. "I know. You could sell part of the land." "To Grant Holloway." Ethan did not recognize the name, but her expression told him enough. "He owns the ranch south of mine," she continued. "He has wanted this land for years because the creek runs through the west pasture. He made an offer 12 days after Thomas was buried." "What did you say?" "I told him my husband had not been dead long enough for the grass to grow over his grave." Ethan almost smiled. Clara closed the ledger. "I am not asking you to save this ranch, Mr. Mercer. I am asking you to work until the time runs out." Ethan looked toward the dark window. He had spent 2 years leaving before anyone could depend on him. Clara Bennett had known him less than a day and had already placed the survival of her ranch partly in his hands. That should have frightened him enough to leave before morning. Instead, he said, "Then we had better start before sunrise." For the next 12 days, they worked from darkness to darkness. Ethan replaced fence posts while Clara cut wire and hauled rails in a small wagon. When he told her to rest, she ignored him. When he lifted something too heavy alone, she took the other side without being asked. She rarely complained. That worried him more than complaints would have. On the 5th morning, he found her asleep in the barn beside a half-repaired harness, her head resting against the wooden wall. She had worked after supper and never returned to the house. Ethan covered her with his coat and finished the harness himself. By the time she woke, the sun was rising. "You should have woken me," she said. "You needed sleep." "I need a ranch." "You will lose both if you collapse." Clara stood and handed him his coat. "You speak like a man who knows something about collapsing." Ethan's hands became still. For a moment, the sound of breaking timber returned to him. He heard a young man shouting his name. He saw dust filling a half-built barn in Missouri. He felt the terrible weight of a beam that should never have fallen. Then the memory passed. "I know enough," Ethan said. Clara watched him, but she did not ask another question. That afternoon, a well-dressed man rode through the gate on a black horse. He wore a clean brown coat and polished boots that had never touched honest mud. Clara's face hardened when she saw him. "Grant Holloway." The man removed his hat and smiled as if they were old friends. "Clara, I heard you hired help. You hear too much about land that does not belong to you." Holloway looked toward Ethan. "One drifter will not carry a ranch through winter." "He is carrying more than you have." The smile left Holloway's eyes. "I came to make you a better offer. $90 for the west pasture, enough to clear your note and leave money for spring. The west pasture is not for sale. You may feel differently when the snow comes." Clara stepped closer to him. "When the snow comes, this ranch will still be mine." Holloway placed his hat back on his head. "We will see." He rode away slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. Ethan watched him disappear down the road. "He knows about the bank note," he said. "He knows everyone's debts." "Does he have influence at the bank?" "He helped establish it." Before Clara could say more, a rider appeared in the distance, coming fast toward the ranch. The young messenger stopped near the house and handed Clara a sealed envelope. She opened it beneath the fading afternoon light. Ethan watched the color leave her face. "What is it?" Clara handed him the paper. The bank had changed the deadline. The $80 payment was no longer due in 7 weeks. It was due in 10 days. And at the bottom of the notice was Grant Holloway's signature. Clara read the notice 3 times, as though the words might change if she stared long enough. They did not. $80 in 10 days. If the payment was not made, the bank would take control of the West Pasture and sell it to cover the debt. The West Pasture held the creek, the strongest grazing land, and the only road wide enough for wagons to reach the wheat field. Without it, the ranch would not survive another year. "This is not legal," Ethan said. "It is legal enough when the man signing the order helped write the rules." Clara folded the paper carefully. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "We bring in the wheat. The whole field. As much as we can. The mill is 2 days away with a loaded wagon. Then we lose 2 days on the road." Ethan looked toward the west field. The wheat stood beneath the darkening sky, dry and ready, but there was too much for 2 people to harvest in 10 days. "We need workers. No one around Cedar Hollow will cross Grant Holloway. Then we find men who do not care about Holloway." Clara gave a tired laugh. "Do you know many brave men with empty schedules?" "I know desperate men." Before sunrise the next morning, Ethan rode into Cedar Hollow. The town was little more than one dusty street, a general store, a blacksmith shop, 2 saloons, and a church with peeling white paint. He found 3 men behind the livery stable looking for work. One was an old cattle hand named Amos Reed. The second was a quiet young man called Luke Carter. The third, Ben Wallace, had lost his farm after 2 years of drought. Ethan offered each man $2 and meals for 6 days. Ben shook his head. "Holloway hears we worked for the Bennett widow. He will make sure we never get hired in this county again." "He already owns half the county," Amos said. "Man cannot own our hands too." Luke looked at Ethan. "Will she pay?" "If the wheat reaches the mill." "And if it does not?" "Then I will." Ethan had only $12 when he came to the ranch. Most of it was still in his coat. It would leave him almost nothing. The men agreed. By noon, all 5 of them were in the west field. Clara drove the cutter while Ethan and the others gathered the wheat into bundles. They worked beneath a hard sun, stopping only long enough to drink water. At night, they ate at Clara's kitchen table. The 2 empty chairs were filled for the first time since Thomas Bennett's death. Amos told stories about cattle drives in Texas. Luke ate quietly and listened. Ben spoke about the farm he had lost and the wife who had taken their children east to live with her parents. Clara listened to all of them, and Ethan noticed that the house no longer felt as silent as it had on his first evening. For 4 days, the work went well. On the 5th morning, they found the cutter damaged. A metal pin had been removed from the wheel assembly. When Clara started forward, the wheel broke loose, throwing her from the seat. Ethan reached her before she hit the ground hard. He caught her beneath the shoulders and lowered her into the wheat. "Are you hurt?" "My side." She tried to stand and nearly fell. Ethan lifted her into his arms. "I can walk." "You cannot breathe without pain." "The wheat will not cut itself." "The wheat can wait 10 minutes." "It cannot wait 10 days." He carried her back to the house while the other men examined the machine. The pin had not fallen out by accident. Someone had removed it during the night. "Holloway," Clara said from the bed. "You cannot prove it." "I do not need proof to know who wants me to fail." Ethan checked her ribs as carefully as he could. Nothing seemed broken, but every movement caused pain. "You stay here today." "No." That was not a request. Clara looked at him sharply. "This is my ranch." "And that is your body. You only get one." "So did Thomas." The words came out harder than she meant them to. Silence filled the room. Clara turned her face away. "I am sorry," she whispered. Ethan sat beside the bed. "You do not have to apologize for missing him." "I do not only miss him. Sometimes I am angry with him." Ethan said nothing. He promised he would be careful. I warned him about that horse. He laughed and told me he had handled worse. 4 days later, I was standing beside a grave. Her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to wipe them away. Then I feel ashamed because he did not choose to die. He did not choose to leave me with debts and broken fences, but I still wake some mornings angry that he is gone. Grief does not ask permission before it becomes anger. Clara looked at him. You know that from experience. Ethan stared at his hands. There was a young man named Samuel Price. He worked under me in Missouri. He had not spoken the name aloud in nearly 2 years. Clara waited. I was building a large barn outside St. Joseph. Samuel was 20. He wanted to become a carpenter. He trusted everything I told him. Ethan's jaw tightened. I made a mistake in the roof supports. I measured the weight wrong. Samuel was above me when the beam failed. Clara's face changed, but she did not look away. Did he die? No, he lived. Ethan's voice became quieter. His back was broken. The doctor said he would walk with pain for the rest of his life. He would never climb, lift, or build again. Did you stay with him? I visited once. I sat beside his hospital bed and said almost nothing. Then I left Missouri. Why? Because every time he looked at me, I saw the life I had taken from him. Clara studied him for a long moment. You did not take his life. I took the future he planned. And leaving gave it back. The question struck harder than any accusation. Ethan stood and walked toward the window. No. Clara's voice softened. You have spent 2 years punishing yourself. I deserved it. Maybe, but Samuel did not deserve your silence. Ethan looked back at her. He may hate you, she continued. He may never forgive you, but you should have stayed long enough to hear him say it. Ethan had no answer. Outside, a hammer struck metal. Amos and Ben were repairing the cutter. Clara pushed herself upright. I still need to work. You can keep the ledger and prepare food. Let us handle the field. She looked ready to argue, then stopped. Us. Ethan realized what he had said. Not them. Us. Yes, he said, us. The cutter was repaired by afternoon. They lost half a day, but worked after sunset by lantern light to make up the time. On the 7th day, the first wagon was loaded. On the 8th, the second stood ready. The mill would pay enough for the wheat if the grain arrived dry. The sky, however, had turned black over the mountains. Cold wind moved through the fields, carrying the smell of rain. We leave tonight, Ethan said. The road is dangerous after dark, Luke warned. The rain will reach us by morning. They tied lanterns to the wagons and started toward the mill before sunset. Clara rode beside Ethan despite the pain in her ribs. Amos and Ben drove the second wagon while Luke rode behind them. For several hours, the road remained dry. Then the rain came. It fell hard and cold, turning the trail into mud. The wagon wheels sank deeper with every mile. Lightning flashed across the sky, showing the river rising beside the road. Near midnight, the first wagon reached an old wooden bridge. Ethan stopped the horses. The bridge shook beneath the force of the water. We cannot cross, Clara said. We cannot turn back, Ethan replied. A tree branch struck the side of the bridge and tore away part of the railing. Behind them, the second wagon slid sideways in the mud. Ben shouted. One wheel dropped over the edge of the road. The wagon leaned toward the rushing river, carrying half of Clara's wheat with it. Ethan jumped down and ran toward it, but the earth beneath his boots began to break away. The wagon shifted again, and the rear wheel dropped farther over the crumbling edge. Cut the horses loose, Ethan shouted. Luke jumped from his saddle and ran toward the front team. Amos grabbed the reins while Ben climbed onto the leaning wagon, trying to throw the heavy wheat sacks toward the safer side. The mud beneath Ethan's boots gave way. He fell to one knee, caught himself with both hands, and felt cold river water rush around his legs. The bank was breaking apart beneath the wagon. In another minute, the whole load would slide into the river. Clara climbed down from the first wagon. "Stay back," Ethan shouted. She ignored him. Together, she and Ben pulled sacks from the wagon while Amos tried to calm the frightened horses. Luke cut the leather straps, freeing the animals just as the wagon moved another foot toward the water. One horse stumbled, but Luke caught its bridle and dragged it toward solid ground. A loud crack came from beneath the wagon. The wooden axle split. "Move," Ethan yelled. Ben jumped away. Clara turned, but her injured side slowed her. Ethan ran through the mud and grabbed her around the waist just as the wagon rolled over the edge. They fell together onto the road while the wagon crashed into the river below. Wheat sacks burst open in the black water, and months of work disappeared in seconds. Clara stared down at the river. Half the harvest was gone. For several moments, no one spoke. Then Clara lowered her head into her hands. "We cannot pay the bank now." Ethan looked at the remaining wagon. It still held nearly half the wheat. The amount would not be enough to cover the full note, but it was not nothing. "We keep moving," he said. Clara looked at him as if he had not understood. "We lost half of it." "I know. The bank wants $80 tomorrow." "I know. There is no way to make enough. Then we find another way." Clara stood, anger rising through her grief. "You cannot repair everything, Ethan." "No," he said, "but I can keep you from giving up beside this river." The rain continued, but the worst of the storm passed before dawn. They crossed the bridge one wagon at a time after Ethan and Amos strengthened the weakest boards with timber taken from the broken railing. By late afternoon, they reached the mill. The mill owner weighed the remaining wheat and counted $43 onto the desk. Clara stared at the money. She had $23 at the ranch. Together, it made $66. $14 short. Ethan reached inside his coat and placed his remaining money beside hers. Clara shook her head. "No. It is $11. That leaves you with nothing. I have tools and a horse that needs feed. I will manage. I will not take your last dollar." Ethan pushed the coins toward the mill owner. "You hired me to help save the ranch. I hired you for $10. You have not paid me yet." Clara looked at him, then at the coins. They now had $77. Still $3 short. Amos stepped forward and placed a silver dollar on the table. Ben added another. Luke reached into his pocket and placed down the last one. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I cannot repay all of you." Amos smiled. "Then keep the fence standing. We may need a place to work next spring." They returned to Cedar Hollow the following morning, with the bank deadline only hours away. Clara entered the bank carrying the full $80 in a cloth bag. Grant Holloway sat behind the manager's desk. His smile faded when she poured the money onto the polished wood. "Count it," Clara said. The bank manager counted every coin twice. $80, he confirmed. Holloway leaned back in his chair. "You were fortunate." "No," Ethan said from the doorway. "She worked for it." Holloway looked toward him. Clara placed the payment notice on the desk. "I want the note marked paid." The manager stamped the paper and signed it. Holloway's face remained calm, but his fingers tightened around the arms of his chair. "You have saved the pasture," he said, "for now." Clara picked up the receipt. "No, Grant, I saved my ranch. You only proved how badly you wanted me to fail." Outside the bank, Clara stopped on the wooden walkway. Her strength seemed to disappear all at once. Ethan caught her before she fell. "I am all right," she whispered. "No, you are not." For once, she did not argue. He carried her to the hotel across the street, where she slept for 12 hours without waking. When they returned to the ranch, the first snow had begun to fall. The fence still needed work, and one side of the lower barn leaned badly after the storm. Ethan should have left. The 6 weeks were nearly finished, and Clara no longer had money to pay him. Instead, he stayed. He repaired the remaining fence before the ground froze. Then he strengthened the barn with new support beams. Every measurement brought back the memory of Missouri, but he checked each one carefully and continued. One night, while working inside the barn, Ethan heard wood crack above him. His body froze. For a moment, he was back beneath the falling roof in St. Joseph. He heard Samuel scream and felt dust in his lungs. Then Clara's voice came from the doorway. "Ethan." He could not move. She stepped closer. "Look at me." He turned slowly. "You are here," she said. "This is not Missouri. I made one mistake." "Yes. I may make another." "Yes." He stared at her. Clara placed her hand against his chest. "So will I, so will every person who stays long enough to matter." Ethan's breathing slowed. "What if someone gets hurt again?" "Then you do not run. You stay, you tell the truth, and you help carry what comes next." Her words remained with him through the winter. In January, Ethan wrote a letter to Samuel Price. He told him everything. He admitted the mistake, the fear, and the cowardice of leaving. He did not ask for forgiveness. He only promised that he would not disappear again. The answer came 3 weeks later. Samuel wrote that he had hated Ethan for leaving more than for the accident. He wrote that his life was difficult, but not finished. He had begun teaching carpentry drawings to young workers who could not afford formal training. At the end of the letter, Samuel wrote one final line. "Build something honest and put your name on it." Ethan read the line many times. That spring, he rebuilt Clara's barn from the foundation up. When the final beam was raised, he carved 2 words into the wood. Ethan Mercer. Clara found the name while bringing him water. "You finally put your name on something," she said. He looked at her. "I was thinking of putting it on more than the barn." She became very still. Ethan removed his hat. "I came here believing I could fix a fence and leave, but every day I stayed, this ranch became harder to leave. So did you." Clara looked toward the farmhouse, the fields, and the fence stretching across the green land. "I am still broken in places," she said. "So am I. I still miss Thomas. I know. There will be days when I cannot give you all of my heart. I am not asking you to forget the man you loved." She looked back at him. "What are you asking?" "That you let me stay and help repair whatever breaks next." Clara smiled through her tears. "Then you had better stay a long time, Ethan Mercer. This ranch breaks something every season." They were married in June beneath a small arch Ethan built from the last damaged rails of the old fence. Amos, Ben, and Luke stood beside them. The mill owner brought his family, and even the bank manager attended, though Grant Holloway did not. The ranch survived the following winter. It survived the one after that, too. The fence did not remain perfect. Posts leaned. Wire snapped. Storms brought down rails, but Ethan and Clara walked the boundary together, carrying tools between them. Years later, when their children asked how their parents had met, Clara always told them the truth. A tired stranger stopped beside a broken fence and said it was falling apart. She told him that she was too. Then he stayed long enough to fix both, not all at once and never perfectly, but one broken piece at a time.